When my daughter-in-law opened the front door and saw me standing in the living room, the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. She grabbed the door frame to steady herself. I had been waiting in that chair, my chair, the worn leather one by the window, for about 40 minutes, long enough to pour myself a cup of coffee from my own kitchen, long enough to set the folder on the side table where she could see it the moment she walked in. I looked at her and I said, calmly, "The way you speak when you've already won. Welcome home, sweetheart. We need to talk." She couldn't get a single word out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began, because the ending only means something if you understand everything that came before it. My name is Gerald. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county, mostly bridge inspection and infrastructure planning. I retired at 59 with a modest pension, a paid-off house in Asheville, North Carolina, and what I thought was a solid family around me. My wife, Patricia, passed from ovarian cancer 6 years ago. That loss reshaped everything. It took the color out of certain rooms for a long time. But I kept going, the way you do. I tended the garden she planted along the back fence. I kept her bird feeders full. I learned to cook more than just eggs and sandwiches. My son, Daniel, is 38. He and his wife, Renee, live about 20 minutes from me, or they did. After Patricia died, Daniel started coming around more. At first I was grateful. He'd help with the gutters. We'd watch football on Sunday. Renee would bring over casseroles. It felt like the family was pulling together. That's what grief does when it works, right? It draws people closer. What I didn't understand then was that not all proximity is warmth. Some of it is surveillance. About 2 years ago, Daniel started mentioning, gently at first, that the house was getting to be a lot for one person. He said it with concern in his voice, the way a good son would. He said he worried about me being alone in a 4-bedroom house with all those stairs. He mentioned a couple of his friends whose parents had downsized and were so much happier. I listened, nodded, and didn't think much of it. I was 62. I wasn't ready to talk about downsizing anything. Then the suggestions became more specific. He mentioned a continuing care community out past Weaverville. He drove me out there one Saturday, and I'll admit, the grounds were beautiful. We had lunch in their dining room. The staff was friendly. But when we got back to my house that evening, and I walked through the front door and smelled the wood and the old books and Patricia's ghost still hanging in the curtains, I knew I wasn't going anywhere. I told Daniel as much. He said he understood, but he didn't stop. The real shift happened around 18 months ago. Renee started joining the conversations. She was subtler than Daniel, which should have put me on guard. She'd ask about the roof, about the HVAC system, about whether I'd had the foundation checked lately. She framed everything as concern. One evening, over dinner, she said, "Gerald, we just want to make sure that if something happened to you, everything would be organized for your peace of mind." She said your peace of mind while looking at Daniel in a way that had nothing to do with my peace of mind. A few weeks after that dinner, Daniel brought up a document. He said his friend, a guy named Travis who worked in financial planning, had suggested that for older homeowners living alone, it was smart to set up a property management arrangement, just in case. He had papers with him. He said Travis had drawn them up, that it was standard stuff, that it basically just meant that Daniel could handle property decisions on my behalf if I were ever incapacitated or unavailable. He used the word unavailable. I remember it because it's an unusual word to use about your father. I told him I wanted to read it myself before I signed anything. He said, "Of course, absolutely, take your time." He left the papers with me. I read them twice that night. The language was dense, but one clause stood out. It gave Daniel broad authority over the property, including the ability to list, negotiate, and execute sale contracts on my behalf under a durable power of attorney structure. It wasn't a management arrangement. It was a transfer of control. I put the papers in my desk drawer and didn't mention them again. I told Daniel the next time I saw him that I was still looking them over. He said that was fine. He said there was no rush. But I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed that Renee had started taking photographs inside the house. Not obviously, she wasn't walking around with a camera, but I caught her twice with her phone out in the rooms I wasn't in. And once I found her in Patricia's sitting room upstairs, the door partly closed, and when I pushed it open, she startled and said she was just looking for the bathroom, The bathroom is on the other side of the hall. She has been to my house at least 40 times. She knows where the bathroom is. I said nothing. I started keeping notes. About a year ago, Daniel called me and asked if I wanted to join them for a long weekend trip. He said Renee's cousin had a place near Hilton Head, South Carolina, right on the water, and they thought the sea air would do me good. He said it had been too long since I'd taken a real break. I hadn't been away from Asheville in almost 2 years at that point, and I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe I need a few days out of this house. I agreed to go. We drove down together, the three of us, on a Thursday morning. The cousin's place was a nice rental on a barrier island, low tide smell, and pelicans on the dock. We had dinner that night, sat on the porch, had a few beers. It felt normal. I started to think I'd been wrong about Daniel and Renee, that I'd been reading too much into things. Friday passed the same way. Saturday morning, I woke up early and walked down to the water. When I came back to the house around 8, it was quiet. I went to the kitchen to put on coffee and noticed both cars were gone. I assumed they'd run out for groceries. I made myself breakfast and sat on the porch and waited. By 9:30, they hadn't come back. I tried Daniel's cell. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Renee's. Same. I walked around the property and noticed that the bags they'd brought inside their bags were gone. All of them. The rental house was rented in Renee's cousin's name. I didn't have the address written down anywhere accessible because Daniel had driven. My phone had about 20% battery. My wallet was in my bag, which was still in the guest room, so I had my cards and my ID. But I had no idea which road to take off the island or how far the nearest town was. I sat down on that porch and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not panic, something colder than panic. A kind of clarity that comes when you understand all at once what someone actually is. I stood up. I found the house's welcome binder, the one rental properties leave with the Wi-Fi password and the checkout instructions, and I found the property management company's number. I called them and explained that I was a guest at the property and that my ride had left unexpectedly. They gave me the address of the nearest town. I called a cab. While I waited, I sat at the kitchen table and I wrote down every detail I could remember. The dates, the conversations, the papers Daniel had brought, the photographs I had seen Renee taking. Every single thing I could recall, I wrote it down on paper I found in the welcome binder. The cab took me to a gas station in Beaufort. I used my card to get cash from the ATM, and then I called a car service to take me to the Savannah airport 2 hours south. While I waited for the car, I tried Daniel again. This time it rang. He picked up. I said, "Daniel, where are you?" He said, "Dad, I'm sorry. Renee got sick. We had to leave in a hurry. I tried to wake you, but you were sleeping. I left a note on the counter." There was no note on the counter. I had sat at that counter for an hour. I said, "I see. I'll find my own way home." He said, "Dad, we'll come back and get you." I hung up. I want to be honest about that drive to Savannah. There were about 40 minutes in the back of that car where I let myself feel the weight of it. My son had left me deliberately. Not in a moment of panic, not in a genuine emergency, deliberately. He had waited until I was asleep and driven away. The question was why? And sitting in that car, watching the low country marsh slide past the window, I think I already knew. I got home to Asheville late Saturday night. The house was locked, which it should have been, and I used my key. Everything looked normal at first glance. I walked through each room slowly. Nothing was visibly disturbed, but in my office, the desk drawer, where I had kept those unsigned papers, Daniel brought along with several years of financial documents, and the folder I kept with Patricia's estate paperwork, that drawer had been opened. I could tell because I keep a small rubber wedge under the back corner of the drawer to keep it from sliding. The wedge was on the floor. The papers were still there, but they'd been gone through. I sat in my office chair for a long time that night. The next morning, Sunday, I drove to a copy center and made complete copies of everything in that drawer. Every document. I took the originals and the copies, and I divided them between 2 locations. One set I kept, and the other I drove to my brother Raymond's house in Hendersonville and asked him to hold on to them without explanation. Raymond is a practical man. He didn't ask questions. He put the folder in his safe. On Monday morning, I called a real estate attorney named Margaret Osei, whose name I found through the County Bar Association's referral service. I told her I needed a consultation about property protection and a power of attorney situation. She had an opening Tuesday afternoon. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "Mr. Gerald, you were right to come here before signing anything. What you're describing in that document is not a standard property management arrangement. It's a mechanism that would have given your son the legal ability to sell your home without your active participation." She asked if I had the document. I handed her the copy. She read through it for several minutes. Then she set it down and said, "This was drafted by someone who knows what they're doing. The language is designed to look protective while actually being transferable. A lot of people sign things like this because they trust the person in front of them." I told her I had not signed it. She said, "Good. Now let's make sure it stays that way." Over the next several weeks, Margaret helped me do a number of things. First, we filed a formal notice with the Buncombe County Register of Deeds that recorded my explicit intention to retain sole ownership of the property and flagged any attempted transfer as requiring direct, in-person verification by me. It's a mechanism not many people know about, but it creates a legal speed bump that's difficult to work around without my physical presence. Second, we set up a legitimate revocable living trust with me as the sole trustee, which put the house inside a legal structure that was considerably harder to manipulate. Third, she wrote a letter, formal, official, on her firm's letterhead to Daniel, advising him that any further attempts to initiate property transactions on my behalf without my written consent, co-signed by her office, would be treated as attempted fraud. I didn't tell Daniel any of this. He called twice that week, both times with variations of the same story about Renee being sick and the rushed departure. I let him talk. I said very little. I asked how Renee was feeling. He said she was better. I said I was glad. I did not mention the attorney or any of the steps I had taken. This is where I want to say something directly, because it's something I've thought about a great deal. Some people, when they're wronged, want the other person to know immediately that they've been caught. They want that confrontation right away, because anger demands an audience. I understand that impulse. But I had spent 31 years in infrastructure work, and the one thing that field teaches you is that a structure fails at its weakest point, not at the point you're watching. If I confronted Daniel the moment I suspected him, he would have adjusted. He would have found another angle. The only way to close every door was to do it quietly, completely, before he realized the doors were closing. So I said nothing, and I kept watching. About 6 weeks after the Hilton Head trip, something new happened. I received a piece of mail from a law firm in Charlotte, not Margaret's firm, a different one. The letter was formal and dense with legal language, but the core of it was this. A petition had been filed in Buncombe County Superior Court requesting a competency hearing to evaluate whether I was capable of managing my own affairs. The petitioner was my son, Daniel. I read that letter standing at my mailbox at the end of my driveway, in the October light, with the leaves just beginning to turn on the oaks along the street. I want to tell you that I was surprised. I want to say I didn't see that coming, but I think somewhere I had been waiting for it. The Hilton Head departure was the opening move. This was the second. If a judge declared me legally incompetent, a guardian or conservator would be appointed to manage my affairs, and in many such cases, an adult child petitioning the court is given strong consideration for that role. If Daniel became my legal conservator, he would control the house, the accounts, everything. I called Margaret that afternoon. She was quiet for a moment after I finished reading her the letter. Then she said, "They've made a mistake." I asked what mistake. She said, "They filed this in the wrong sequence. They should have gotten the property transfer in place before filing a competency challenge. Now they've tipped their hand while you still have full legal standing. We can respond. And we can respond aggressively." She filed a counter motion within the week. Margaret requested that the court appoint an independent guardian ad litem to investigate the origins of the petition, and she attached to the filing 3 things: the unsigned power of attorney document, the formal notice we had already filed with the Register of Deeds, and a sworn statement from me detailing the Hilton Head incident with dates, times, and the phone records from that morning, showing my repeated unanswered calls to Daniel. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She contacted the Bar Association and filed a separate complaint against the Charlotte firm that had submitted the competency petition on the grounds that the petition contained a material misrepresentation. It stated that I had exhibited signs of cognitive decline and inability to manage basic daily functions, which is a serious claim that required supporting documentation. The documentation they submitted was a single letter from a physician I had never seen or met, dated 3 weeks earlier. A doctor I had never seen had written a letter about my cognitive state. Margaret found out who he was. His name appeared in disciplinary records as having had his license reviewed for providing documentation in legal proceedings without direct patient examination. She included that information in the bar complaint. The guardian ad litem the court appointed was a woman named Sheila Vance, and she was thorough. She came to my home twice. She spoke with Raymond, who had been holding my documents and who gave a calm, detailed account of my mental acuity and daily functioning. She spoke with my neighbors, the Hendersons, who have known me for 19 years. She spoke with my former supervisor from the county, who told her that he had spoken with me by phone just 2 months prior about a technical question related to a bridge retrofit project, and that my reasoning had been, quote, completely precise. She requested my medical records from my actual physician, Dr. Halverson, who had seen me 4 months prior for my regular physical and noted no cognitive concerns whatsoever. Sheila Vance submitted her report to the court in December. It found no basis for the competency challenge. It also noted, pointedly, that the petition appeared to have been filed in coordination with an unsigned legal document that would have transferred property rights to the petitioner, and that the timing raised questions about the petitioner's motivations. The competency petition was dismissed. 2 weeks after the dismissal, Margaret received a call from the Charlotte firm attempting to negotiate. They indicated that Daniel wished to resolve the matter without further legal proceedings. Margaret told them that her client would consider resolution, but only on specific terms, and that she would send those terms in writing. She and I sat down and we talked about what I actually wanted. Not what I could get in a fight, but what I wanted. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I told her I wanted 3 things. I wanted a formal, notarized statement from Daniel, acknowledging that the power of attorney document had been prepared with the intent to transfer property rights without my full and informed consent. I wanted the physician who had submitted the fabricated cognitive assessment to be reported to the state medical board, Margaret said, that was already in motion independently. And I wanted a recorded lien placed against any property Daniel and Renee currently owned or would own within 10 years in the amount of my legal fees, to be paid in full. I did not ask for an apology. I didn't see the point. An apology is just words. I wanted the record to say what actually happened. It took another 6 weeks of back and forth between the attorneys. But in the end, Daniel signed the notarized statement. The lien was recorded. The medical board complaint moved forward separately. Margaret called me on a Tuesday morning in late January to tell me that the final documents had been executed. I thanked her for everything. I hung up the phone and I sat in my kitchen for a while and I looked at the bird feeders Patricia had chosen, the red one and the yellow one hanging from the dogwood tree. A pair of chickadees were working through the sunflower seeds. It was very quiet. Then I made a phone call not to Daniel, to a locksmith. I had him come that afternoon and rekey every lock in the house. Front door, back door, garage, the side gate. Daniel had a key to this house. He no longer did. After the locksmith left, I called Renee's number. Not Daniel's, Renee's. She answered on the 3rd ring cautiously, because she didn't know what to expect. I said, I have something at the house that belongs to you. A serving dish you left here last Thanksgiving. You should come pick it up. I paused. Come alone. This afternoon if you can. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she'd be there around 4. I set the serving dish on the kitchen counter. I made a pot of coffee. At 10 minutes to 4, I sat down in the leather chair by the window, my chair, the one I've had for 20 years. The one that's worn at both armrests, and I opened the folder on the side table so the tab was visible. The folder had a label. The label said, in Margaret's firm's formatting, Evans Property Trust, confirmed sole ownership. At 4:03, I heard a key turn in the front lock. The key didn't work. There was a pause, and then the doorbell rang. I got up and opened the door. Renee was standing on the porch looking the way people look when they've been preparing themselves for something, and then find themselves somewhere they didn't prepare for. She saw me. Then she looked past me into the living room at the chair, the side table, the folder sitting in plain sight. She grabbed the doorframe. I said, "Welcome home, sweetheart. We need to talk." I stepped back and held the door open. After a moment, she walked in. I won't tell you the full conversation. Some of it doesn't need to be repeated, and some of it I wouldn't be able to get through without feeling things I've already finished feeling. But I will tell you that I showed her the notarized statement Daniel had signed. I showed her the recorded lien. I told her that the physician who had written the fabricated assessment had been reported to the state medical board and that Margaret expected a formal board review within the year. I told her that copies of all documents were held by my attorney, by my brother Raymond, and by a fireproof filing cabinet in this house, to which she did not and would not ever have a key. Then I handed her the serving dish and I said, "You should go." She left without the dish. I watched her car pull out of the driveway and I stood in my own doorway in the January afternoon, with the cold coming in from the mountains the way it does in Asheville in winter, carrying the smell of cedar and wood smoke from somewhere down the street. My house stood behind me. Patricia's bird feeders hung in the dogwood tree, still and waiting for morning. I have thought, since then, about what I would want anyone to take from this. Because this isn't just my story. I know that. I've lived long enough to know that the specific details change, but the shape of this thing is not uncommon. There are people out there right now, good people, capable people who are being slowly prepared for something like this and don't see it yet, who are handing trust to people who are measuring them for a door they're planning to close. So let me be plain about what I learned. Keep your important documents somewhere that is not your primary residence, and somewhere that is not in the care of anyone who stands to benefit from your incapacity. Tell someone you trust, not a family member who is involved where those documents are. Know the name of a real estate attorney in your county before you ever need one. And if someone you love begins suggesting, gently and persistently, that you might want to think about what happens to your property when you're gone, listen for what's underneath that gentleness. Love doesn't have urgency. Love waits. The house is mine. It was mine before any of this started, and it is mine now, and it will be mine until I decide what becomes of it. Patricia's bird feeders are still full. The leather chair still sits by the window. Some mornings I sit in it and drink my coffee and watch the chickadees work through the seeds, and I feel something I can only describe as still. Not happy, exactly. Not sad. Just settled. Like a structure that's been tested and held. And that, I think, is enough.